Who is the greatest NFL player of all time? Now, there's no straightforward answer, but at the very least, I can let you know it's not any of these guys. Or it might be one of these guys, but we're gonna have to, at the very least, put an asterisk on said title. And sure, the problem with an overall NFL GOAT, regardless of position, is that there are too many positions in this sport that have very different roles, which makes them not comparable. Because of this, I will break this video down by position. In this video, we will cover 3 positions that are mainly discussed in NFL GOAT debates. I can do more positions in later videos, but right now, let's get the hard part out of the way: quarterbacks. We all know where this is going. The general consensus on who the greatest quarterback to ever play in the NFL without question is Tom Brady. It's my job to explain why it's not Tom Brady. And yeah, there's only one guy who can actually explain this the correct way. That is Barry McCockiner. Shout out to him. But today you're stuck with me, so bear with me and enjoy your off-brand cereal. Here's why Tom Brady is not the GOAT of the quarterback position. First and foremost, from 2001 to 2019, the 19 years Brady was a starter for the Patriots, the AFC East was a complete cakewalk for the Patriots to enjoy cannon fodder during the regular season. For reference, in this time frame, the Jets, Dolphins, and Bills combined for 18 winning seasons in a 19-year stretch. The Patriots alone had 19 winning seasons in that same 19-year stretch. At best, Tom Brady's divisional competition was mediocre, and at worst, they were up against hopeless teams with no chance to win their division. Now, this is only scratching the surface. Let's also consider the fact that Tom Brady was surrounded with an all-time great defense. If we were to compare his defenses to the defenses surrounded by, say, Aaron Rodgers, in Tom Brady's entire career, 350 plus starts, his defense has not allowed 44 plus points once ever in his entire career. In Aaron Rodgers' 10 playoff losses, that's just 10 starts, his defense allowed 44 plus points 3 times. Just imagine if Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady switched places and Tom was stuck in cheese country all alone and Aaron was the one with a world-class system and one of, if not the greatest NFL coach at his helm with Bill Belichick. But you're probably wondering, what about in an individual aspect? Tom Brady is a jack of all trades. I'll give him that. I'm not saying he's a terrible quarterback, but he's not the best in any one physical category if you were to draft him purely on athletics and eye test. For example, he doesn't have the strongest arm. He can't run like other quarterbacks. He doesn't have the greatest cannon nor the greatest legs. And even from a talent perspective, while this is intangible, you can argue from eye test alone he does not have the skill set of Peyton Manning. If you were to redo that 2000 draft with no knowledge of the future, 100 out of 100 times, Tom Brady would still be taken very late in that draft. Physically speaking, there's not much to build off of. Here's a question to throw out there. What is Tom Brady without the trophy case? Let's compare him to Drew Brees, but remove the jewelry collection. How many seasons has each QB passed for more than 4,900 yards in a single season? Tom Brady only did this twice his entire career. Drew Brees did this 6 times in his career. Patrick Mahomes already did it twice, and he's still in his prime with many years to come. It's hard to put a metric on talent, and you can argue that total passing yards per season isn't much, but at least it's a start because it does show how reliant a team is on passing yards, and in the same breath, it's very difficult to rack up a large number of passing yards on dinks or dunks. You're gonna need some Hail Mary bombs. So with this metric, you can make the argument that Tom does rely on dinks and dunks, which explains his lack of 4,900 yard seasons. Tom Brady's best argument for his GOAT status, aside for rings, is longevity. It is true, Tom Brady has the most career games by a quarterback with 335 games all time. Hats off to Tom for achieving that. Now, some people would consider this a product of the so-called Tom Brady rule. For those who don't know, there was a rule created after the injury that had Tom out for the entirety of the 2008 season, and this rule stopped defensive players from lunging towards a quarterback's legs because that's exactly how Tom Brady got injured. Now, the following statement I'm about to make is a bit of tinfoil hat, so take it with a grain of salt. But what if maybe, just maybe, players are afraid to rough up Tom Brady because of his all-star cachet? And I'm not saying this is a fact, nor is it a theory, it's just something to consider to put in the back of your head. It's not one of my core arguments. Just imagine if Brett Favre, who retired in 2010, had the Tom Brady rule apply to the majority of his prime. Keep in mind, Brett Favre played 302 games in an era where defenses were still allowed to be savages and quarterbacks had to be quicker or deal with the physical blows. Overall, Tom Brady is is a great quarterback, there's no denying that, but physically speaking, he does not have one single attribute worth noting. He's played alongside some of the most elite defenses in NFL history, and while he does have longevity on his side, would that be enough to consider him the GOAT? And if Tom Brady is not the GOAT, how about the guy literally nicknamed the GOAT, Jerry Rice? Let's talk about wide receivers, and of course, the best wide receiver is Jerry Rice. At least that's what the general consensus is. Now, I can't tell you why Jerry Rice is a bad wide receiver, because he's not. I can't tell you why Jerry Rice is overrated, because he's not. What I can tell you is that in 2007, Randy Moss broke the record for the most receiving touchdowns in a single season with 23 of them. But wait. This segment is not going to be a Jerry Rice versus Randy Moss debate, because at best, that will just dissolve into a peak versus longevity debate, and really at that point, it's just a matter of preference. What I will say is that there is a wide receiver who does seem to be lost to time, but he deserves to be in this conversation, and that is Don Hutson. Don played from 1935 to 1945, so you could argue this era is incomparable to modern football. However, it's incomparable in Don's favor. Many people can end the Jerry Rice versus Randy Moss debate by saying the rules today heavily favor wide receivers, but in that same context, Don's era of wide receivers had little to no respect, and in many ways, he is the grandfather of this position. He invented several routes that are still used today. Jerry Rice might be good at route running, but Don invented route running. Don also created the button hook, hook and go, and Z outs. He played 11 seasons, won 3 championships, made 8 All-Pro teams. He led the league in receiving yards 7 times and touchdowns in 9 times. He also led the league in interceptions once. His records for career touchdowns and touchdowns in a season stood for over 40 years. Don once got 17 touchdowns in a single season. He did this in 1942 while also averaging 110 yards per game. And don't forget, he did this in 11 games, as NFL seasons were only 11 games long back in that time frame. He also got 1,211 yards in that season. To put this into perspective, Jerry Rice only got 1,078 yards in his touchdown season, with Joe Montana and Steve Young as his quarterbacks. Jerry Rice later in his career also played alongside Jeff Garcia, a 3-time Pro Bowler, and Rich Gannon, who was the 2002 MVP. Randy Moss had the luxury of playing with Tom Brady, and while Don didn't play with scrubs, his quarterbacks aren't making any top 10 lists anytime soon, let's just say that. Also, I forgot to tell you that Don played 3 different positions: wide receiver, defensive end, and he even kicked field goals and extra points. Basically, he played almost all 60 minutes of every football game he was in. That is insane athletic work. Speaking of athleticism, Don could run a 100-yard dash in 9.7 seconds. For comparison, the world record at that time was 9.4 seconds, and the current record today is just 9 seconds. Don led the league in receptions and receiving yards 8 times, receiving touchdowns 9 times. In comparison, Jerry Rice led these categories 2, 5, and 6 times. Don also led the league in receptions once, extra points 3 times, and field goals once. Now, I'm not saying Jerry Rice isn't the GOAT. What I am saying, if someone had to put an asterisk against that title, this is the best argument I could come up with. And last but not least, we have running back. Now, statistically, this one goes to Jim Brown. It would be very hard to make a statistical counter argument against Jim Brown to name a running back with better stats. So if I had to put an asterisk against his GOAT title, it would have to come in the form of an intangible. Also, there is no denying Jim Brown is one of the all-time greats, period. Like, I'm sure he's in everyone's top 3, if not top 5 if we're really stretching it. Who else can you put up there besides Walter Payton, Barry Sanders, maybe Emmitt Smith, but Jim Brown's gotta be up there. With all this being said, the biggest knock against him is that in the games that matter most, being the NFL championship at the time, Jim Brown seems to underperform in these big games. He's played in 4 championship games, and his stats in those 4 games are 66 attempts for 241 yards, 8 receptions for 99 yards, and just 1 single touchdown. That's about 3.65 yards a carry and roughly 60 yards a game. Now that's just the tip of the iceberg. Another very notable point to make is that not only was Jim Brown a part of some stacked teams, he was more specifically a part of stacked offenses. He had at least 1 Pro Bowl player on his offensive line, and in many seasons, he had multiple on his squad blocking for him. He also had 3 different Hall of Famers blocking for him. Those 3 are Mike McCormack, Gene Hickerson, and Lou Grossa. And if we expand that list to include first-team All-Pro players, then that list increases with James Ray Smith and Dick Schifrath. To further prove how much insane help Jim Brown had, let's compare the running backs before, after, and during Jim Brown's career on this same team. For example, Bobby Mitchell. As a Browns rookie in 1958, Mitchell rushed for 500 yards, but he did this on just 80 carries with an average of 6.3 yards per carry for the Cleveland Browns. In his second season, Mitchell ran for 743 yards, averaging 5.7 yards per carry. Mitchell was eventually traded in 1962 to the Redskins. If we look at the 1966 NFL season for the Browns, the year after Jim Brown retired, Leroy Kelly took Jim Brown's role and he averaged 5.5 yards per carry and finished second in the NFL in rushing and first in rushing touchdowns. To make a long story short, any competent running back would have looked really good if they were to run behind the Browns' offensive line during that era. Again, that's not to take away from the legend that is Jim Brown. He is the only player in NFL history to average more than 5 yards per carry and 100 yards per game. And he's the only rookie to win MVP, so I'm not denying his greatness. But if you had to put an asterisk on his career, his supporting cast, alongside his no-shows in the biggest games, would be that asterisk. So here were some asterisks on 3 potential NFL GOATs. Let me know which positions you want me to cover in the future and what you thought of this video. Don't forget to tackle that like button and subscribe with notifications turned on. I'm Touchdown Rewind, and I'll fast forward to you later.